Hey, if you'd like, how about having dinner with my daughter sometime? Huh? What? At a dinner meeting with Mr. Sawyer of a business partner, I, just an ordinary employee, was suddenly encouraged to go on a matchmaking date with his beautiful daughter. A dinner with such a gorgeous woman? And she's the daughter of a company president? Why would someone like me, just a plain high school graduate, get this chance? A matchmaking date? Feeling like I had been caught in a surreal dream, the day of the arranged date finally arrived. As I waited, the company president's daughter appeared before me, blushing, and said, "Do you remember me? I've been wanting to see you for so long. Is it a quirk of fate, I wonder?" There was a secret between me and her. My name is Ryan. I grew up in a family that was far from wealthy. My parents and 5 siblings. I'm the eldest of 5, with my youngest sister being 10 years younger than me. Our family of 7 lived in a small rental house in the countryside. Every day, we ate large portions of rice or noodles, but having plenty of meat or vegetables was a rare luxury. Even so, our parents loved and raised us all equally, despite our financial struggles. They made sure we could at least finish high school, even though money was tight. I had originally planned to start working right after middle school, but it was my father who convinced me otherwise. I only finished middle school, and I had a hard time finding work. In your generation, it'll be even tougher. Because of my father's words, I enrolled in a local public high school. The school didn't have a strict policy against part-time jobs, so I started working while studying, handing over a portion of my wages to help with household expenses. Every month, I would give my mother an envelope with my pay, and she would always accept it with a mix of gratitude and guilt. That expression of hers is something I'll never forget. I also saved a little for myself. But since I spent most of my free time working, I rarely had a chance to use my money. On my rare days off, I would often take my younger siblings out, especially my youngest sister, whom I adored. She was strong-willed. Growing up with 4 older brothers, she learned to hold her own in fights. By now, none of us could win against her in an argument. Back in elementary school, she used to get into fights with boys in her class so often that the school frequently called us in. Since both of our parents worked, I, as the eldest, was the one who had to go pick her up. Every time I arrived, she never looked remorseful. Instead, she'd grin at me and say, "Hey there." All I could do was sigh. I should have scolded her more, but I never did, because standing next to my grinning sister was always a girl, head down, on the verge of tears. Unlike my sister, this girl was quiet and timid. She was often bullied by the boys in class. And my justice-driven sister would get into fights defending her. Taking both of them home together became routine. On those walks, my sister, despite her fiery personality, would always beg me for a piggyback ride. "You're so big, Ryan," she'd say, laughing happily on my back. By the time I entered high school, I had already grown over 6 feet tall. Sometimes, just to tease my sister, I would offer to carry her friend instead. She would get jealous, and it was adorable. After I turned 17, my life changed drastically. My father passed away. My mother had no time to grieve, and she immediately took on more work to support us. I, too, increased my part-time hours and contributed even more to the household. Ryan, I'm so sorry. On the day of my high school graduation, my mother, exhausted, wept as she apologized to me. Right after graduating, I joined a company that, while offering different starting salaries for high school and college graduates, provided fair promotions based on performance. Thanks to that, now that I'm in my 30s, my salary is far from low. I've continued sending money back home so my younger siblings could have the opportunity to pursue what they wanted. But next year, my youngest sister will graduate from college, and my mother has told me I no longer need to send money. As a project leader, I've been handling more responsibilities, and I feel like I've built a stable life in my own way. Sure, I struggled financially. But I'm grateful to my father for insisting I finish high school and to my mother for working relentlessly until I graduated. Alright, Ryan will be the leader for the next project, and Nathan will assist him. The upcoming project was a major deal. I was chosen as the leader in our first meeting. Excitement and nervousness swelled inside me. Ryan. As I stepped out of the meeting room, a voice called me from behind. It was Nathan, my newly assigned assistant. How did you pitch it to the department head, Tom? We were the same age. But Nathan had entered the company as a college graduate and was placed directly into this department, an elite track in our company. I guess people who have been with the company longer tend to get favoritism from Tom and the others, huh? What do you think, Ryan? Nathan had never liked the fact that I had worked my way up from the field as a high school graduate. His words and attitude always had a hint of bitterness. And right now was no different. I just pitched my proposal like everyone else, and this time, I happened to be chosen. I feel reassured having you as my assistant. Looking forward to working together. What he said wasn't entirely wrong. Tom had been looking out for me since my days on the ground. He knew about my family situation, and I was aware that he sympathized with me. That's exactly why I didn't want to stir things up. I'll coordinate the schedule with the client. Nathan's left eyebrow twitched slightly, perhaps unimpressed by my response. But he quickly returned to his usual cold demeanor and started discussing work. We'll arrange a dinner meeting with the client soon. I'll check their availability. That'd be a big help. As I nodded, Nathan gave me a slow once-over before adding, Mr. Sawyer, the president of the other company, will also be attending the dinner, so please pay attention to your attire. I doubt you'd show up in work clothes, though. With a smirk, Nathan walked away. This was going to be a rough ride. Watching him leave, I glanced down at my own outfit and let out a sigh. Is that expensive-looking suit custom-made? And those polished leather shoes. Nathan is wearing a branded watch even I recognize. Meanwhile, I stood there in my work uniform, worn-out shoes, and the cheap, waterproof watch I had used since my fieldwork days. On the night of the dinner meeting, the introductions and business discussions went smoothly. As the drinks flowed, the conversation gradually shifted to more casual topics. Mr. Sawyer, the client company's president, was a very approachable man. He had a natural talent for conversation, making people feel at ease while skillfully drawing out information. He was observant. You've got a nice watch there. He must have noticed it when Nathan handed him a fresh hand towel. Mr. Sawyer casually brought up the topic of Nathan's watch. Thank you. I always pay attention to what I wear in a professional setting. Though, some people who worked their way up from the field don't seem to get that. Nathan's latter remark was clearly aimed at me. I could feel his smirk as he glanced in my direction. What about you, Ryan? Not really into watches? Mr. Sawyer turned to me with a friendly curiosity. I had, of course, dressed in a suit tonight. I had put in an effort, but compared to Nathan's fine fabric suit, mine was obviously of a lower grade. I hadn't worn a watch. I didn't own one that would be appropriate for an occasion like this. Honestly, I'm not very knowledgeable about these things. Ryan here has quite the story. Unlike most of us, he joined straight out of high school and worked his way up. Nathan cut in before I could finish, his words sounding like praise but dripping with condescension. Whether or not Mr. Sawyer picked up on Nathan's subtle jab, he turned to me with genuine interest. Straight out of high school, huh? That's impressive. It must have been quite the journey to get here. He took a sip of his sake, and I leaned forward to pour him another as I replied. I didn't go to college simply because my family couldn't afford it. I don't think I got to where I am today through any extraordinary hardship. I've just been fortunate to meet the right people in the company and on the field. Financial reasons, huh? So, what kind of struggles do you consider ordinary? Mr. Sawyer set down his cup, picked up the sake bottle, and gestured with his eyes for me to hold my cup. Feeling a bit humbled, I held it with both hands as he poured me a drink, which I quickly finished before continuing the conversation. For some reason, Mr. Sawyer seemed genuinely interested in my upbringing. I never considered my hardships something to brag about, nor did I particularly enjoy talking about them, but before I knew it, I had shared quite a bit: how I grew up in a poor rural home with many siblings, and the challenges that came with it. At some point, Mr. Sawyer took out his phone, tapped on it for a moment, and then showed me a photo. It was a family picture: him, his wife, his son, and his daughter. His son resembled him, a sharp-looking young man with an intelligent gaze. His daughter, on the other hand, didn't particularly look like him but had a poised and graceful presence. She was undeniably beautiful. My son already works at my company, but my daughter will be graduating next year. She's probably around the same age as your sister. Would you like to have dinner with her sometime? Huh, what? Dinner? With such a beautiful woman? And she's the president's daughter? Caught completely off guard, I struggled to find words. Before I could respond, Nathan cut in. Would this be just the two of them? If you'd like, I can arrange the dinner and join as well. No, I want Ryan to meet my daughter. Listening to his story, I thought it might be good for her to hear from someone who's already working. I'm not forcing anything. This isn't a formal matchmaking event, just a simple dinner. No need to feel pressured. With that, I had no real reason to refuse, so I accepted Mr. Sawyer's offer. On the taxi ride home that night, Nathan's attitude toward me seemed even sharper than usual. Ryan, it must have been really tough growing up poor and not being able to go to college. Sounds like one of those large families they show on TV. Upper management sure loves a good underdog story, huh? Well, I wouldn't really know. Perhaps emboldened by the alcohol, he was being much more direct than usual. Oh, and about that dinner with Mr. Sawyer's daughter, don't get your hopes up for some Cinderella story. People from prestigious families marry within their ranks. Given your background, you wouldn't even be considered. He was really laying into me, but I wasn't foolish enough to take the bait. If my past was entertaining for some, then so be it. I silently watched the cityscape pass by outside the taxi window until we arrived at my stop. A few days later, Mr. Sawyer reached out again, and sure enough, the dinner with his daughter was arranged. The designated restaurant was a French place inside a luxury hotel, an establishment that was obviously high-end at first glance. I felt out of place just stepping inside. Dinner in a place like this. This is nerve-wracking. After being shown to my seat by the waiter, I unlocked my phone and opened the home screen. 12:20. The reservation was for 12:30, so arriving 10 minutes early shouldn't be a problem. I silenced my phone, tucked it into my jacket, and let out a slow breath. The elegant atmosphere made me restless. I found myself scanning the room nervously before shifting my gaze to the window to steady myself. The view from this high-floor restaurant was a sprawling city skyline. The night view must be stunning. As I was lost in thought, a voice called out from behind me. Ryan, sorry to keep you waiting. Snapped out of my daze, I quickly stood and turned toward the voice. It was Mr. Sawyer, and standing just behind him was a petite young woman. This is my daughter, Madeline. Madeline, this is Ryan. The woman introduced as Madeline was just as beautiful as in the photo. No, even more so in person. I'm Madeline. As our eyes met, her expression shifted to one of surprise and slight confusion. It wasn't until I caught myself staring that I realized I hadn't even greeted her yet. Ah, my name is Ryan. Thank you for having me today. As the course meal neared its end and the dessert was served, Mr. Sawyer checked his watch and said, I'm sorry, but I'll be leaving now. You two can take your time and enjoy the rest of the evening. There's still time left for the table, so feel free to order more wine and relax. Don't worry about the bill. It's taken care of. Saying that, he stood up and left. I'm bewildered to find myself in a situation that feels like I'll leave the two young ones to talk, as if this were a matchmaking meeting. Throughout the entire meal, most of the conversation had been between Mr. Sawyer and me. Madeline had barely spoken, only offering the occasional polite nod or brief response. As I hesitated, wondering how to start a conversation, Madeline suddenly let out a deep sigh. Ugh, Ryan, was it? What exactly did my father tell you to get you here? Did he say this was some kind of matchmaking setup? Her tone, casual and somewhat exasperated, was completely different from the reserved demeanor she had maintained up until now. I was caught completely off guard. No, it's not like it was a matchmaking meeting or anything. He just wanted me to listen to your job search situation. As I answered hesitantly, her expression twisted with skepticism. Job search advice? From you, Ryan? Her tone carried an unspoken message. Why would anyone consult a high school graduate about that? She must have overheard my conversation with Mr. Sawyer during dinner. Learning about my impoverished upbringing and how I started working at this company straight out of high school. My youngest sister is the same age as you, so maybe that's why he thought I could offer some insight. When I mentioned my sister, Madeline's expression seemed to soften a little. Ha! Well, whatever. Since we're here, should we order a digestive? Unfamiliar with the term, I mentally put up a question mark. It must have shown on my face. You don't seem used to places like this, she sighed. It's an after-dinner wine. Ryan, from what I've heard, this kind of restaurant isn't really your thing, is it? You shouldn't push yourself. Was she trying to say I had no business being in a place like this? That was a bold statement. Besides, this restaurant wasn't my choice, it was Mr. Sawyer's. I had no say in the matter. That's true. I must admit, I come from a humble background, so I'm not used to places like this. I suppose I should choose restaurants more suited to my status in the future. Being told that by someone 10 years younger, just like my sister, irritated me at least a little. But after all, she is the daughter of an important client. Maintaining a businesslike attitude, I responded to her remark. But my response must not have sat well with Madeline. A clear look of distaste crossed her otherwise beautiful face. I've been thinking about this since you were talking to my father, but do you make a point of selling your poverty? Or do you think my father and I enjoy hearing about it? Her words were completely unexpected, and I was at a loss for words, unable to process their meaning right away. Being poor is fine. But making it a self-deprecating joke to entertain others? That's just pathetic. It felt like I'd been struck with a blunt weapon. What does she know about my struggles? After that, I was too busy suppressing my rising anger to continue any meaningful conversation. We left the restaurant without ordering a digestive. Thank you for your time today. I'm sorry I couldn't be of any help and, if anything, ended up making you uncomfortable instead. As we waited for a taxi, I spoke those words, and Madeline looked up at me as if she had something to say. But instead, she reached for the taxi door. I gestured for her to get in. Just before the door closed, I thought I heard her whisper, "I'm sorry," in a barely audible voice. But I pretended not to notice, took a step back, and bowed with a polite, artificial smile. I really messed up. Back home, I buried my head in my hands. That last farewell was obviously too sharp. What the hell am I going to do? She's the daughter of an important business partner. But what's with her attitude? Acting all high and mighty, saying being poor is fine. I was still fuming, but more than that, her words stuck with me. Coming from someone a whole decade younger, they were impossible to ignore. What was that tiny apology for? No, more importantly, what about work? If today's dinner ended up jeopardizing the deal, I'd be in deep trouble. I poured a cheap bottle of wine I had impulsively bought on the way home into a dollar store glass and gulped it down. Honestly, I'd rather have barley tea after a meal. The unfamiliar wine left a bitter aftertaste in my throat, just like my thoughts. Monday morning, shortly after the workday started, I received a call from Mr. Sawyer. My hands were clammy as I gripped the receiver. There was no way I could refuse his invitation to dinner, so I readily accepted. As a result, I spent the entire day in a gloomy mood. Seeing me like that, Nathan smirked and said, "Did you mess up at the dinner? If you're stepping down from the project, let me know early so I can take over." That only made me feel worse. That night, at dinner with Mr. Sawyer, I barely sat down before bowing my head. "I fear I may have offended your daughter with my shortcomings. I sincerely apologize." To my surprise, Mr. Sawyer looked taken aback. "I haven't heard anything from my daughter about that evening yet. Can you tell me what happened?" Nervously, I lifted my head and recounted the events of that night. Mr. Sawyer closed his eyes in thought for a moment before, to my shock, bowing his head to me. "Ryan, I'm sorry. My daughter said something out of line." Flustered, I panicked. "No. Mr. Sawyer, please raise your head." But he kept his head lowered as he continued. "It's not so much the daughter, it was my fault for prying too much into your background. I didn't mean to pity or mock your struggles. But I may have made you feel like I was pushing you to talk about them. I sincerely apologize." His unexpected apology left me scrambling for words. Before I could respond, he lifted his head and spoke again. "Would you mind if I shared a little about my own family? Actually, Madeline is my wife's daughter from her previous marriage. My first wife passed away shortly after giving birth to my son. I remarried Madeline's mother when Madeline was still in elementary school. Before their marriage, Madeline and her mother didn't have a wealthy life. After Mr. Sawyer married her mother, Madeline's life changed drastically, and she no longer lacked anything materially. However, their relationship as father and daughter remained somewhat fragile. Mr. Sawyer felt like he could never truly close the distance between them. I think of her as my own daughter. But ever since the topic of job hunting came up, she's been distancing herself from me even more. She rarely talks to her older brother either, and lately, even her mother has noticed that she seems withdrawn. I was hoping she would find someone she could confide in, and that's when I met you. You're a straightforward and kind person, Ryan. Could you be someone she can talk to? I think a strong yet fragile girl like her needs an older brother figure she can rely on." As he lowered his head again, I couldn't help but think, why me? The thought wouldn't leave my mind. "Fathers are so powerless when it comes to their daughters," he said with a weak smile. Seeing Mr. Sawyer give a hesitant smile, I said, "Understood. I'm not sure how much help I can be, but I'll do my best to support them." There was no other way to respond. After that, Mr. Sawyer arranged another dinner for me and his daughter. I was worried that Madeline might refuse to meet me, even if I was okay with it. But surprisingly, she accepted without hesitation. This time, I got to choose the restaurant, and we decided to meet under the clock tower near the nearest station. When I arrived right on time, she was already there. Despite the bustling crowd at this popular meeting spot, she stood out immediately. Since I had told her in advance that we were going to a casual Italian restaurant, her outfit was noticeably more relaxed compared to last time. She really is beautiful. Even in a casual outfit, she had an air of elegance that captivated me. As she checked the time and glanced around, her gaze met mine. For a brief moment, her face seemed to light up, only to quickly turn into a displeased expression. I panicked and hurried over to her. "Sorry to keep you waiting. You invite me and still make me wait? Unbelievable." I had arrived exactly on time, so I wished she would cut me some slack. But if she felt like she had been waiting, I had no choice but to apologize. "I'm really sorry." Thank you for coming today. She looked me up and down and frowned. Could you at least put a little more effort into your outfit? It seemed my choice of clothes wasn't to her liking. Last time, I had worn a suit, but today, I had dressed casually. I wasn't exactly into fashion, so I probably didn't look particularly stylish. Even someone as clueless about trends as me could tell that Madeline's outfit was fashionable. She was probably wearing some high-end brand I had never heard of. I guess it must be embarrassing to walk around with a shabby old guy like me. Sorry about that. At my apology, her eyes widened in surprise before she sharply retorted, "No. That's not what I meant. Since it's a date, I just wanted you to dress up a little more. I don't think you're poor or an old man." Her words came out in a rush, and I found myself instinctively apologizing again. Sorry about that. Just hurry up and take me to the restaurant. Also, you're older than me, so stop talking so formally and just speak normally. She turned her face away, but I couldn't help but notice that her ears were slightly red. That realization made my own face feel a little hot. Meanwhile, the word date kept echoing in my mind. All right, then I'll just talk normally. But you should do the same. As I peered at her face, she glanced up at me and gave a small nod, looking just a little pleased. Over dinner, we had a casual conversation. As we started to feel more at ease, I asked, "By the way, have you decided on a job yet, Madeline?" "I've received offers from a few places, but I still have final interviews coming up, so nothing is set in stone yet." Since her major aligned with her father's company, I couldn't help but wonder, you could just work for Mr. Sawyer's company, right? Have you considered that? The moment I asked, the atmosphere around her changed sharply. I realized too late that I had hit a sore spot. "I don't want to talk about this today," she said, shutting down the conversation. To lighten the mood, I suggested, "Do you have time after this? If there's somewhere you want to go, let's go together." "Then come shopping with me," she said. I agreed without hesitation. I'm exhausted. Saying yes to shopping had been easy, but I had no idea it would be this tiring. The first place she dragged me to was a clothing store. Apparently, she refused to be seen with me in my current outfit. Surprisingly, it was a brand I actually recognized, a relatively affordable one. I had expected to just accompany her, but instead, I became her dress-up doll, trying on outfit after outfit. By the fifth round of changing, she finally seemed satisfied. She then asked the store clerk to remove the tags and casually said, "We're leaving like this," before paying for everything herself. "I'll pay for it." Flustered, I reached for my wallet, but Madeline dismissed me with a casual wave. "You're carrying my bags all day, so consider that your payment," she said, shoving a shopping bag filled with clothes. When had she even bought them? Into my arms before striding out of the store. From there, I was dragged from store to store, playing the role of her personal servant, my arms weighed down with branded shopping bags. By the time the sky had turned orange, our shopping spree finally ended with her purchase of a pastel green handbag. Apparently this year's trendy color for spring. Once I got her into a taxi, I was finally free. Just before she left, I forced the money for my clothes into her hands. There was no way I was going to let a student pay for my outfit. She had probably chosen affordable brands on purpose, knowing I wouldn't accept anything too expensive. Still, how many stores does she need to drag someone through? I thought, exhausted. At least we got a little closer, I guess. For a man in his 30s, the day had been exhausting, but I could call it a small step forward. From the way she reacted when I mentioned her father during dinner, I had a feeling that Madeline was struggling with their relationship. If that's the case, they need to talk things out as a family. Clearly, we were still far from reaching that goal. I sighed as I looked up at the sky, where the orange hues were now fading into pale purple. After that, both Madeline and I became busy, and we didn't have another chance to meet. However, we had exchanged contact information during our last date, and we texted a few times each week. It was nothing special, just short messages about what had happened in our week, but there was something oddly ticklish about it. Between my company's project with Mr. Sawyer and other ongoing work, I was overwhelmed with deadlines and hadn't found the right moment to ask her out again. Nearly a month had passed since our last meeting when, on an overcast day, I was out for a business meeting. The damp warmth of late spring hung in the air, the humidity making everything feel sticky and unpleasant. Why do I have to be running around so much on a day like this? I thought irritably. But my next client was a company introduced by Mr. Sawyer. If we landed the deal, it would be a major contract, one that would benefit both my company and me personally. Having already finished a meeting with one company earlier in the day, I checked my watch while heading to the station. The current time was 12:50. Originally, my next meeting had been scheduled for 1 p.m., but I had arranged to push it back to 2 p.m., so I had some time to spare. Since I hadn't eaten yet, I glanced around, considering grabbing a quick bite while reviewing my notes. Noticing an unusually large number of young girls standing around, I couldn't help but furrow my brow, thinking that this area had become less safe. As I scanned the scene, I spotted a commotion between a man and a woman a short distance away. Both were holding umbrellas, obscuring their faces. "I told you, I'm not interested. Let go of me." I knew that voice. The voice made me freeze. Then, my eyes caught sight of the woman's handbag, pastel green. Before I even had time to think, my legs were already moving. "I'm telling you, name your price." 2, 3. I barely had time to register the sleazy tone of the man's voice before my hand clamped down on his shoulder. "Do you need something from her?" The man flinched, his voice turning defensive. "Ha? Who are you?" When he turned and looked up to meet my gaze, his posture stiffened immediately. Moments like these made me appreciate my naturally towering height. "Do you need something from my sister?" Let go of her hand. Looking down at the man with an intimidating glare, I saw him scoff. "So it really isn't true, huh?" Then, he roughly let go of the woman's arm, almost throwing it aside. The force of it made her stumble backward, and she let out a short, ugh. "Ow." Reacting instinctively, I grabbed her shoulder and pulled her toward me. "Are you okay, Madeline?" I found myself holding her close, almost instinctively. Realizing what I was doing, I quickly stepped back, bent down to pick up her fallen umbrella, and handed it back to her. I'm fine." She clutched the handle of her pastel green handbag tightly, her fingers trembling slightly. "Why are you here?" My voice came out lower than I intended. But seeing her in a place like this, shaken and vulnerable, sent a wave of anger through me. I couldn't help but press her for an answer. "Do you even know what kind of place this is? Does Mr. Sawyer know you're here?" This area had become notorious in recent years as a spot where young women were scouted and preyed upon by men. It had been a growing concern. The moment I mentioned her father, Madeline snapped her head up and glared at me. "Why are you bringing him up? What does it matter to him where I go or what I do? Oh, are you worried that I'll ruin his company's reputation? Don't worry, he doesn't even want me involved in that company. He has his perfect son for that, doesn't he? If I cause any trouble, he'll probably just cut me off, since I'm not his real daughter anyway." Her words came out in a furious rush, her emotions clearly overwhelming her. "If that happens, maybe I'll just make money this way after all." She spat out her words with a self-deprecating tone, and I raised my voice at her. "Enough already! Do you even realize how much Mr. Sawyer worries about you? Not his real daughter? He put you through university, gave you a comfortable life. Can't you see that's love? Throwing money at someone isn't love. I never asked for any of it. Stop acting like a child. Parents spend money to give their kids opportunities because they love them, so they can become anything, do anything. Mr. Sawyer told me himself he thinks of you as his real daughter. But he's scared. Scared that if he tries to get closer, you'll reject him. And you're the same, aren't you? Did he really say he doesn't want you involved in the company? Or are you just assuming? You need to talk to him properly. Families don't understand each other unless they communicate. As I firmly gripped Madeline's shoulder and finished speaking, her large, startled eyes gradually lowered. After a brief silence, she began to speak in a small voice. I was just heading to the station. I don't usually walk through this area, but since it was raining, I wanted to take a shortcut. Then that guy called out to me. I didn't know this place was like that. Hearing that, I couldn't help but click my tongue in frustration. Madeline flinched, her shoulders trembling slightly. No, not at you. It's not your fault, Madeline. It's mine. I didn't even listen to you before jumping to conclusions. I'm sorry. I felt just as furious at myself as I had been at that guy earlier. Really, I'm sorry. You were heading to the station, right? Let's go together. As I started walking, I heard Madeline let out a small ouch from behind me. It seemed she had hurt her left foot when she was pushed away. My anger toward that man flared up even more. Madeline clutched the hem of my jacket, her head lowered like a child on the verge of tears. Seeing her like that tightened something in my chest. Madeline, hold my umbrella. She looked at me in confusion as I handed it to her. Then, I adjusted my backpack to the front and crouched down with my back to her. Get on. As I crouched down, ready to give her a piggyback ride, I could tell Madeline was hesitating. But... she murmured, unsure. You won't make it to the station like that. I'll carry you to the taxi stand. Just hold the umbrella. Unless you'd rather be slung over my shoulder like a sack of rice? At that, she finally, hesitantly, climbed onto my back. Thanks. A barely audible thanks was whispered near my ear, and I couldn't help but smile. Once we reached the taxi stand, I carefully set her down on a bench, checking her foot. Hey, I think your phone kept vibrating in your pocket. Was someone calling you? Madeline pointed at my pocket. I quickly pulled out my phone, and my blood ran cold. There were 7 missed calls from my next meeting. The time read 1:20 p.m. I still had over 30 minutes until the scheduled time. It's a place you can get to in not too much time from here. Something must have happened. Just as I was thinking that, my phone rang again. I immediately answered. This is Ryan. I apologize for missing your calls. I was just about to return your... Before I could finish, an angry voice cut me off. Our scheduled time has long passed. What is going on? What? A chill crept up my fingers, not from the rain but from the realization sinking in. I sincerely apologize. At 1:40, I arrived at the client's office, practically out of breath from running. Without even catching my breath, I bowed deeply. Since this meeting was arranged through Mr. Sawyer's introduction, we made time for it. At the client's words, filled with both frustration and disbelief, I bowed my head even deeper. Thankfully, Nathan was able to handle the discussion, so it wasn't a complete loss. But originally, you were supposed to be the main contact. Correct? If we move forward with the contract, we may request a different representative from your company. Please keep that in mind. Lifting my head, my gaze met Nathan's. It was Nathan who handled the communication when the meeting time was rescheduled. In the shared scheduling chat for the project leader and assistant, the change to 2 p.m. was clearly noted. And yet, the look in Nathan's eyes told me everything. I got played. Fisting my hands tightly, I bit down my frustration. Once we returned to the office, I immediately called Nathan into the meeting room. I need an explanation. Are you telling me the schedule change never happened? As I checked the shared schedule on my way back, the text rescheduled to 2 p.m. had vanished, replaced by 1 p.m. meeting. This schedule is basically managed only between the people involved. Any changes made in this chat are known only to Nathan and me. If this deal falls through, the company will suffer a huge loss. Did you really go this far just to take me down? I had known for a while that Nathan saw me as a rival, but I never imagined he'd stoop this low. My anger boiled over. Ha! Things went just fine without you, so what's the problem? Honestly, I can't stand how you use your poor background in hardship as a sob story to win deals. This client was introduced to you by Mr. Sawyer, right? How exactly did you cozy up to him? Seriously, I admire the desperate survival instinct. But after this mess up, everything you built with your poverty card will be gone. Best case, you get demoted. Worst case? Back to the field work, huh? His sneering words and mocking gaze made my mind go blank. Was it possible for someone to hate another person this much? Unable to say anything, I stood frozen as Nathan patted my shoulder and walked away with a smirk. Well, good luck with that. A few days later, I was summoned to the president's office. The entire time, I had been on edge, juggling my work while bracing for the worst. As I stood before Mr. Wallace, I had already half resigned myself to whatever fate awaited me. Even if I get sent back to field work, I'll make it work. I can still send money to my family. But contrary to my expectations, Mr. Wallace greeted me with a broad smile. Ryan, well done. We've finalized the contract with the client Mr. Sawyer introduced us to. And not only that, they specifically requested that you remain the account manager. Keep up the good work. Caught completely off guard, all I could do was bow my head to Mr. Wallace in shock. I always make sure to stay in frequent contact with every client, even before signing a formal contract. Even with Mr. Sawyer's introduction, I had treated it no differently. No matter how certain or favorable the contract may be for us, I never change my approach. Last time, I made the worst mistake. I was late for an important meeting. Despite that, the client appreciated my previous efforts and decided to keep me as their point of contact. However, when I later visited them to formally greet them again, I found out that Mr. Sawyer had also put in a good word for me. That same day, I called Mr. Sawyer to express my gratitude. I didn't do anything. This is all the result of your hard work, Ryan. If anything, I should be the one thanking you. Madeline told me you helped her. He had to be talking about that rainy day. It was nothing, really. How is she? I should have taken her to a hospital, but she's fine. It was just a mild sprain. Since that day, Madeline and I hadn't been in touch, so I had been worried. But Mr. Sawyer's words brought me a sense of relief. Because of you, she opened up to me, Ryan. We finally had a real father-daughter conversation. I never realized just how much she was struggling with our family dynamic. In some ways, she and I are more alike than I thought. There was warmth in his voice, happiness mixed with a tinge of regret. That's only natural. Your family, after all. But I really don't think I did much. Even regarding her job. She seemed to think she wasn't needed in your company, and I didn't know what to say to that. I had sensed that this was what she had been wrestling with the most. Mr. Sawyer sighed. That's my fault. I wanted to respect my children's choices. My son joined the company because he wanted to, but I never wanted to force Madeline to do the same. I thought saying nothing was the best way to give her freedom, but I had no idea she felt that way. You gave her the push she needed, Ryan. Because of that, I was able to talk to her, not just as a president, but as her father. Thank you. A few days later, Madeline reached out, and we made plans to meet. It had been a while since we had sat down together like this, and for some reason, the tension felt similar to when we first met. My dad probably told you already, but we finally talked. As a family. As she spoke, her voice carried the same sense of calm and happiness that Mr. Sawyer had the other day. It's thanks to you. Really, thank you. As I listened to her, I felt a mix of relief and something else, an odd sense of emptiness. I guess that means there's no reason for us to meet anymore. After all, the whole reason I got involved in the first place was because Mr. Sawyer asked me to look out for her. Now that she had reconciled with her family, my role was over. We probably wouldn't have much reason to see each other again. Actually, there's something I wanted to tell you. Noticing my distant expression, Madeline hesitated before continuing. When I was little, I actually met you before. I blinked in surprise. When she was in first grade, her father's financial troubles led to her parents' divorce. She was brought by her mother to the countryside, where her mother's family lived. Even after returning to her aging parents, the mother and daughter still couldn't afford a comfortable life. And in a small town, everyone knew everyone's business. A single mother returning home with a child was bound to become gossip. And as children tend to be, her classmates were brutally honest. She became a target for bullying. For not having a father. For being poor. And kids could be cruel. There was always a girl who stood up for her. And that girl had an older brother. Madeline could never forget the sight of being pulled along by the hand as she cried from being bullied. Sometimes carried on her brother's back on the way home. And I knew that scene, too. A little sister who had been a handful back in my childhood. A girl who would sit beside her, head lowered, crying every time I was called to school because of my sister. That girl was Madeline. The very person standing before me now. I fell in love for the first time with that kind, strong back of yours. She looked up at me, her cheeks slightly flushed. But then, she lowered her gaze. I realized it the moment we first met again. But I didn't want you to see how much I had changed. After my mother remarried, we moved here. And everything about my life shifted overnight. People whispered about me being a stepchild, and I started to lose faith in everyone. Even my own family. Her voice wavered as she spoke, her head dropping lower. But even now, you're just as kind. You cared enough to get truly angry at me. You're still the same big brother I first loved. Looking at her now, on the verge of tears, I could see the shadow of the little girl she used to be. I reached out, gently placing my hand on her head, running my fingers through her sleek, beautiful hair. You haven't changed at all. I still can't leave you alone because you always seem like you're about to cry. And you're still the kind-hearted girl who was willing to face me, despite all my flaws. Hearing my words, she suddenly lifted her head. Don't call yourself poor like that every time you belittle yourself, it hurts me. My father, and all the people who have supported you until now, never pitied you. You've built everything you have today with your own strength, with your kindness and integrity. In contrast to her earlier weakness, she now looked me in the eye and spoke with determination. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, sparkling in the light. You're as kind as ever, Madeline. Thank you. Her unexpected words made my nose sting with emotion. Trying to cover it up, I forced a grin. I'm not a child anymore. I don't want to be the little sister you used to carry. I want to stand beside you, as your partner. Ryan, will you be my boyfriend? I thought her dignified eyes were beautiful. If you'll have me, then I'd be honored. Seasons changed, and spring returned once more. Since then, I had continued working hard, steadily building my career, and this year, I was promoted to the main office. As for Nathan, after the incident, he was soon caught in a compliance scandal involving subcontractors in one of his projects. He was demoted. I later heard that he had been clashing with other project leaders as well. perhaps management had been keeping an eye on him for a while. He had been a capable worker, but somewhere along the way, his obsession with surpassing those around him had caused him to self-destruct. Thinking about it, I couldn't help but feel a little regret. If we had managed to maintain a better relationship, maybe we could have pushed each other to grow instead of clashing. As for Madeline, this spring, she finally graduated from university and entered the workforce. She didn't join her father's company. Instead, she pursued a career at a company she had chosen for herself. However, she told me that one day, she wanted to work alongside her brother and help support their father's company. And through it all, she has remained by my side. I want to visit your family with you, Ryan. I need to thank your sister for back then. Now that our relationship was serious and moving toward marriage, we planned to visit my hometown together. She seemed especially eager to see my sister again. That place must be filled with painful memories for her, yet she said, to me, it's a place of memories with my first love. So as long as I'm with you, I'll be fine, she added with a smile. Feeling an overwhelming affection for her, I pulled her into my arms. I don't mind being called poor. No one's trying to steal my past away from me. I no longer feel ashamed of where I came from. Because every struggle, every hardship I endured, none of it was in vain.